So part of the context of this, and that you need to do, I think, is to, on the one hand, listen as Judeans in the aftermath of the war. And to kind of, sympathetically, be in that place, but also to listen now. So I'm thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking about the impact of this of these stories in the context of the communities in Palestine that you were describing, and their experience and the avatars and so on. I mean, that's just, and so these stories are heard differently, by different people. But the good news of this is partly experienced in relation to this broader kingdom that Jesus envisions and that he acts out. So a major part of the story then that happens is that he does good things for his fellow Israelites, those who are sick, paralyzed, blind, possessed by an unclean spirit, a woman who has a flow of blood for 12 years, who touches him. He simply ignores the law in regard to being, and blesses her. The daughter of an elder of the synagogue, who apparently is dead, but he takes care of her. He lifts her up. And she's a 12-year-old girl, and she starts walking around the room. And her mother and her father are absolutely delighted. And a man with a withered hand in the synagogue, who he heals on the Sabbath, and makes everybody so furious that they go out and plot how they could destroy him. This is on the one hand good news, and on the other hand, for some, it's not good news. But what happened was that after he had been teaching all day, he got into the boat and said to his disciples, "Let's go across to the other side." And so they took him just as he was, and there were other boats who were with them. And so it was a kind of boat party, going across the Sea of Galilee. Suddenly, a great storm of wind arose, and the waves began to beat into the boat, so that it was already starting to fill up. And Jesus was asleep in the stern on a cushion. And they woke him up and they said, "Teacher, don't you care if we die?" And Jesus stood up and he rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And there was a great calm. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Why were you afraid? Do you have no faith?" And they were saying to one another up in the front of the boat, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Well, they came across to the other side, to the country of the Gerasenes. The country of the Gerasenes was in the Decapolis. It was the country of the Gentiles, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. These were Greco-Roman cities established by the remnants of Alexander's army 300 years before, after it was disbanded, and then was settled by Pompey with a whole series of Romans to be a kind of eastern boundary for the Roman Empire. So these were great Roman cities with colonnades and theaters and So they were thoroughly Gentile cities. But when he came ashore, there met him, as soon as he got out of the boat, a man who had an unclean spirit. And no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, because he'd often been bound with leg irons and chains. But the chains he wrenched apart, the leg irons he smashed, and no one had the strength to subdue him. All night and all day, he would run among the tombs, beating on himself and crying out with a shriek. And when he saw Jesus, he came up and he fell at his feet and he screamed at him, "What do you want with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, don't torment me!" For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus said to him, "What is your name?" And the man said, My name is Legion, for there are many of us." And he began to beg and beg Jesus not to send him out of the country. Well, there was a large herd of Gentile pigs feeding there on the hillside. And the legion, the demons, began to say to Jesus, "Oh, please, send us into the pigs. Let us enter them." And so Jesus let them go. And the demons came out of the man and entered into the pigs. And the whole herd of swine rushed down the hill, plunged into the sea, and they were all drowned in the sea. The herdsmen, when they saw this, ran into the town and into the country and told what had happened. And people came out to see what had taken place. And when they came, they saw Jesus sitting there with the man who had had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. The man who had had the legion. And those who had seen it told what had happened to the demons and to the pigs. And they began to beg and beg Jesus to please get out of our country. So, he was getting into the boat. And the man who had had the legion begged him that he might go with him. But Jesus refused. And he said, "No. You go back to your family and your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you." And so the man went throughout all the cities of the Decapolis, proclaiming, telling the story about what Jesus had done for him. And everyone who heard it was amazed. Well, there were then other things that Jesus did in Israel. And so there was the woman, when he got to the other side, Jairus, the elder of the synagogue, begged him to come and lay hands on his daughter, whom he said, "My little girl is near death. Please come and lay your hands on her." And so as he was going, I got to tell you this one, there was a woman in the crowd who had had a flow of blood for 12 years. And she had suffered much under many physicians, including one of the things that physicians did with women with this condition, we now know, was they would grind up either burrs and make a little milkshake and have them drink these burrs. They would sometimes, slit their wrists and bleed them for a little while. So when it says that she suffered much under various physicians, it's really the case in terms. They would make them drink all kinds of stuff, try to flush. That was their theory. They would flush it out. She had spent everything that she had, and she wasn't getting better. Instead, she was getting worse. And she heard the reports about Jesus. She came up behind him in the crowd, and she reached out, and she touched his garment. For she said to herself, if I could even just touch his garment, I'll be made well. And immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she knew in her body that she had been healed of her affliction. Jesus sensed that power had gone forth from him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, who touched me? Who touched me? The disciples said to him, Teacher, you see this crowd crushing you, and you ask who touched me? But he continued to look for who had done it. The woman, knowing what had been done for her, and knowing what she had done in touching him and making him unclean, came with fear and trembling and fell at his feet and told him the whole truth. Jesus lifted her up, and he said to her, my daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed permanently of this curse. While he was still speaking to her, they came from the synagogue elder's house. And they said to him, your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher anymore? And Jesus overheard them saying this. He said, don't be afraid. Only believe. So he took with him only Peter, James, and John, and they went to the elder's house. And when they came close to the house, they heard the sound of weeping and wailing. The mourning had already begun. And Jesus put them all out of the house. And they laughed at him. But he said, the girl is not dead. She's just sleeping. And so, when he had put them all out, he took with him the three who were with him and the mother and father of the girl. And he went into where she was. He went over to the bed where she was lying. And he took her by the hand. And he said, Talitha Kumi. And that means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And she got up. And she started walking around the room. She was 12 years old. So she wasn't just a little girl. She was a little big girl. And her mother and father were absolutely delighted, full of joy. And Jesus strictly charged them to say nothing about this to anyone. then he suggested that they might want to give her something to eat. So they did. Well, there are a lot more stories about Jesus doing good for his enemies. I'll tell you one more. Norman had mentioned this. This happened in the immediate aftermath of Jesus teaching. There was a big, he had a fight, a major disagreement with the Pharisees about the purity laws, about the dietary laws. And because they criticized him because he did not require his disciples to wash their hands before they ate. And so they were very angry about that. And that he was doing this as a teacher, as a rabbi, and a teacher of the law. And in the course of his explanation of this to his disciples and to the crowd, he told them it is not what goes into a person that makes him unclean. It's what comes out. For it's from inside, from the heart, that come jealousy, anger, envy, lust, rage, greed, hostility. These are the things that defile a person. Well, by this time he was fed up. And he took off from Israel. And he went to the region of Tyre, where you were. For how long?
A year in Tyre.
Yeah. So he went there. Looks like it was kind of a break for him. And he wanted no one to know that he was there. But he couldn't be hidden. And a woman heard about it. And she came and fell at his feet. Now, the woman was a Greek, Syrophoenician by birth. And I told you yesterday, or was it this morning, about Antiochus IV Epiphanes and what the Syrians did to children in Israel. 7 boys tortured, their tongues cut out, fried in a pan, their feet, their hands cut off. I don't need to go into details. More. There are more in the story. I don't need to rehearse them all. But that was the background of this plea by a Syrian woman, and she begged him to cast a demon out of her daughter. And Jesus said to her, let the children first be fed. It is not right to take the children's bread and feed it to the dogs. And the woman said, yes. Yes, Lord. But even the children, even the dogs will eat the children's crumbs. And Jesus looked at her and he said, for this saying, "You may go your way in peace. The demon has left your daughter." And the woman got up and went home. And she found her little girl in bed. And the demon was gone. Good news.
You know, the first thing I noticed is the difference